Researchers studying ancient navigation practices have confirmed something that genuinely stops most people cold when they first encounter it properly. Ancient humans successfully guided themselves across thousands of miles of completely featureless open ocean, through vast trackless desert environments, across enormous mountain ranges with no marked passes, and through dense forest terrain with no visible landmarks whatsoever, arriving at specific intended destinations with a reliability that modern researchers studying these navigation traditions have found genuinely difficult to explain even after decades of dedicated investigation. All without a single compass, without a single written map, without a single instrument capable of measuring position, direction, speed, or distance with any objective precision, without any mathematical framework for calculating location from observable data. Just raw, accumulated human observational capability applied consistently, generation after generation, until our species had developed what amounts to an entirely parallel navigational science, built from nothing but patient, careful attention to the world, and the disciplined transmission of everything that careful attention revealed. Let's start with the most basic, almost embarrassingly overlooked foundation beneath all of this ancient navigational capability: the sky. Not the sky as a decorative backdrop or a source of weather information, but the sky as a precise, reliable, constantly available navigational instrument of extraordinary accuracy that ancient humans had been carefully reading for tens of thousands of years before any written astronomical record existed anywhere on Earth. The stars move across the night sky in patterns that are consistent, predictable, and geometrically precise enough to provide reliable directional and latitudinal information to any observer who has spent sufficient time learning to read them correctly. Ancient navigators didn't need to understand the heliocentric model of the solar system, the mechanics of Earth's axial tilt, or any of the mathematical astronomy that eventually developed into modern celestial navigation. They needed something considerably more accessible and considerably more practically useful. They needed to know from direct observation and careful memorized experience exactly where specific stars rose on the horizon, exactly where they set, exactly how high specific stars climbed above the horizon at their peak, and exactly how all of these observed positions changed predictably with movement north or south. That knowledge, built through generations of patient nightly observation and carefully maintained oral transmission, represented a genuinely precise practical navigational tool that required absolutely no instruments whatsoever to apply effectively. Let's bring up something genuinely fascinating regarding the specific sophistication of Polynesian star navigation in particular, because this represents one of the most extensively documented and most genuinely impressive bodies of traditional navigational knowledge that researchers have been able to study and partially reconstruct in meaningful detail. Polynesian navigators developed what researchers now refer to as star compasses. Not physical objects, but memorized mental frameworks, organizing the rising and setting positions of specific named stars around the full 360 degrees of the horizon into a comprehensive directional reference system that a trained navigator could consult mentally at any moment during a voyage simply by observing which stars were visible and where they appeared relative to the horizon. A skilled Polynesian navigator reportedly had memorized the rising and setting positions of somewhere between 100 and 200 individual named stars, well enough to use any visible subset of them for precise directional reference, regardless of which specific stars happened to be visible through cloud cover or atmospheric conditions at any particular moment during a voyage. This wasn't passive familiarity. It was the result of years of intensive, dedicated training beginning in childhood, involving memorization of enormous bodies of astronomical knowledge through carefully structured oral recitation, direct observation training conducted by experienced navigators, and practical voyaging experience accumulated progressively over years of increasingly demanding navigational challenges. Let's bring in something that probably deserves considerably more credit than it usually receives in popular discussions of ancient navigation: ocean swell reading. The open ocean is not a uniform, featureless expanse of flat water. It is a complex dynamic environment, crossed by multiple simultaneous swell systems generated by wind patterns operating across enormous geographic distances, each swell system traveling in a consistent direction determined by the wind pattern that generated it, and each swell system maintaining that consistent directional signature across thousands of miles of open ocean, regardless of local wind conditions, at the point where a navigator happens to be sailing. An experienced navigator who has learned to feel the specific directional signature of known primary ocean swell systems through the motion of their vessel can maintain directional orientation even on completely overcast nights when no stars are visible, by continuously monitoring how the ocean itself is moving beneath them. This is a physical skill rather than an intellectual one in the conventional sense. It requires developing a genuine bodily sensitivity to subtle motion patterns through years of accumulated time spent at sea, until the navigator can distinguish between different simultaneous swell systems by feel alone, and extract reliable directional information from the resulting complex motion of the vessel in real time without any conscious calculation whatsoever. Modern researchers studying traditional Polynesian navigation with the assistance of the few remaining practitioners who retained meaningful portions of this knowledge have consistently reported finding the swell reading skill considerably more difficult to develop than the star knowledge, precisely because it cannot be transmitted effectively through verbal description alone. It requires direct physical experience accumulated over an extended period under the guidance of someone who already possesses the sensitivity being developed. Let's bring up something genuinely important regarding land detection at sea, specifically because successfully navigating to a specific small island target across hundreds or thousands of miles of open ocean requires not just maintaining correct directional orientation throughout the voyage, but also detecting the presence of the destination accurately enough to find it before running out of food, water, or favorable wind conditions. Ancient navigators developed multiple independent methods for detecting land that remained invisible below the horizon. Certain seabird species, as documented across numerous traditional Pacific navigation traditions, have reliable daily behavioral patterns involving flying outward from their nesting islands in the morning to feed at sea and returning toward the islands in the evening, providing navigators who understood these patterns with a reliable directional indicator pointing toward nearby land that could be detected from considerable distances purely by observing bird flight direction during the appropriate time of day. Cloud formation patterns above islands differ detectably from open ocean cloud patterns because islands affect local air circulation in ways that produce characteristic cloud formations that experienced observers can recognize from distances exceeding the visible horizon for the island itself. Distinctive changes in ocean color, temperature, and biological productivity occur in predictable patterns around islands in ways that experienced navigators learn to read as reliable proximity indicators. The phosphorescent luminescence visible in certain ocean waters at night changes in characteristic ways near land. Each of these signals individually provides imprecise, uncertain information. Combined and cross-referenced against each other by an experienced navigator who knew what to expect and what each signal indicated, they produced a genuinely reliable multi-channel detection system, allowing ancient Pacific navigators to locate specific small island targets across genuinely vast expanses of open ocean, with a success rate sufficient to produce the extraordinary geographic distribution of human settlement across the Pacific that the archaeological record documents. Let's bring up something genuinely remarkable regarding desert navigation, specifically because this represents a completely different navigational challenge environment that required a completely different set of practical observational skills built around an entirely different set of environmental signals than those available to open ocean navigators. Successful navigation across major desert environments, the Sahara, the Arabian Peninsula, and the Central Asian steppes, required practical working knowledge of a navigational signal set specific to those environments. Star navigation remained applicable and was certainly used. But desert navigation also relied heavily on wind direction knowledge, specifically the knowledge that certain prevailing winds in specific desert regions blow from consistent directions across extended periods in ways that experienced travelers learned to use as reliable directional references even when no landmarks were visible. Dune formation patterns reflect prevailing wind directions in consistent, readable ways that experienced desert travelers learned to interpret as landscape-scale directional indicators. The behavior of certain desert animal species, migration patterns, and daily movement patterns toward and away from water sources provided experienced desert travelers with environmental signals carrying reliable navigational information readable to anyone who had accumulated sufficient observational knowledge of those species' behavioral patterns. Knowledge of specific, reliable water source locations distributed across desert travel routes, sometimes carefully maintained and transmitted across many generations as absolutely critical practical knowledge, represented a navigational resource of genuinely life-or-death practical significance that went far beyond simple directional orientation to encompass the kind of detailed, specific environmental knowledge about particular landscapes that only accumulated generational familiarity could produce. Let's bring up something genuinely important regarding forest and jungle navigation, specifically because these environments present a navigational challenge that differs fundamentally from both open ocean and desert navigation in ways that require yet another completely independent set of practical observational skills. Dense forest canopy severely restricts access to the sky-based navigational signals that work so reliably in open environments, making star navigation and solar position tracking considerably more difficult to apply continuously and consistently. Forest navigation required developing reliable observational skills built around environmental signals available within the forest itself. Moss growth patterns on tree surfaces in certain environments reflect consistent orientation relative to sunlight availability, providing experienced observers with reliable directional information readable from tree surface characteristics alone. Water drainage patterns and stream flow directions provide geographic orientation information readable from landscape features. The behavioral patterns of specific animal species, where certain species nest, where they feed, and how they move through the environment at different times of day, provided experienced forest navigators with biological signals carrying reliable positional and directional information to anyone who had accumulated sufficient observational familiarity with those species. The specific vegetation compositions of different forest zones in many environments change in predictable ways with elevation, soil type, drainage characteristics, and microclimate, providing experienced observers with landscape-level positional information readable purely from the plant species visible around them. Let's bring up something genuinely fascinating regarding the role of oral knowledge transmission, specifically in maintaining navigational knowledge across generations, because this connects directly to something we have discussed throughout this entire series as being absolutely central to ancient human knowledge preservation more broadly. Navigational knowledge, particularly the kind of rich, detailed, multi-signal observational knowledge we have been discussing throughout this video, is exactly the kind of complex, nuanced, practically critical information that is genuinely difficult to transmit reliably across many generations through purely informal general community memory. Ancient navigating cultures across numerous geographic contexts developed highly structured oral knowledge transmission systems, specifically designed to maintain the accuracy and completeness of navigational knowledge across generational transmission. Memorized chants encoding star names and positions. Structured recitation practices for maintaining astronomical knowledge. Formalized apprenticeship relationships pair experienced navigators with selected successors over extended periods of direct practical training. These weren't simply cultural traditions maintained for their own sake. They were carefully developed knowledge preservation technologies specifically engineered to solve a genuinely difficult practical problem. How do you reliably transmit enormously complex, practically critical knowledge from one generation to the next without writing, without diagrams, without any external recording medium whatsoever, and without losing critical details in the transmission process that would degrade the practical reliability of the knowledge for the next generation, who would need to actually apply it in genuinely life-or-death navigational situations? Let's bring up something genuinely important regarding the physical conditioning dimension of ancient navigation, specifically because successful navigation in many ancient contexts wasn't purely an intellectual achievement of accumulated observational knowledge applied to available environmental signals. It also required physical endurance capabilities, perceptual sensitivity developed through sustained conditioning, and practical vessel handling skills that represented their own separate body of accumulated expertise, requiring years of dedicated development and refinement. A Polynesian navigator guiding an ocean voyaging canoe across hundreds of miles of open ocean needed to maintain useful perceptual awareness of swell direction, star positions, wind patterns, and biological signals simultaneously across many consecutive days and nights of active voyaging, under conditions of genuine physical stress from exposure, sleep deprivation, and the physical demands of managing a vessel in open ocean conditions. The perceptual sensitivity required to reliably read subtle ocean swell patterns through vessel motion, or to notice the specific quality of change in biological productivity that indicates proximity to land, degrades significantly under physical fatigue and stress conditions. Managing that degradation through experience, through developed coping strategies, and through knowledge of one's own limitations represented another dimension of practical navigational expertise, built through accumulated experience rather than any kind of formal theoretical training. Let's bring up something genuinely interesting, connecting this entire topic to the social dimension of ancient navigation, specifically because successful navigation across genuinely challenging environments in ancient contexts almost certainly wasn't simply a story of individual navigational genius operating in isolation. Evidence across numerous traditional navigation cultures suggests that navigational knowledge was frequently distributed across crew members of voyaging vessels in ways that allowed different individuals to take primary responsibility for monitoring different navigational signal streams simultaneously. One crew member maintains continuous awareness of star positions and their implications for directional orientation. another monitoring of ocean swell patterns and what they indicated about direction and proximity to known geographic features. Another is watching for biological signals, bird behavior, and ocean color changes that might indicate proximity to land. The same cooperative social structure we have discussed throughout this entire series as being absolutely central to ancient human achievement in so many other domains applied directly to navigational achievement as well. Successful ancient navigation across the most challenging environments wasn't typically an individual achievement. It was a genuinely collective achievement, requiring coordinated application of distributed expertise across a cooperating group. Let's bring up something genuinely important regarding the considerable uncertainty and genuine risk involved in ancient navigation, specifically because it is worth being honest about the genuine danger involved. Rather than presenting ancient navigation as some kind of reliably successful enterprise that consistently achieved its intended outcomes without meaningful failure rates. Ancient navigation across genuinely challenging environments carried a real risk of catastrophic failure. Voyages that set out for specific destinations and never arrived. Desert crossings that miscalculated water source locations by a fatal margin. Open ocean voyages that encountered unexpected weather systems disrupting intended routing beyond the ability of available navigational knowledge to compensate effectively. The fact that ancient humans successfully colonized virtually every accessible landmass on Earth, navigated major desert trade routes reliably enough to sustain extensive long-distance commerce, and developed traditional navigation systems capable of guiding voyagers across thousands of miles of open ocean doesn't mean every individual navigation attempt succeeded. It means the successful navigations produced the historical and archaeological record we can study today, while the failed ones frequently left no surviving evidence beyond their absence from the historical record. Recognizing this honest picture of ancient navigational success rates matters because it correctly frames ancient navigation as a genuinely difficult achievement accomplished through accumulated expertise and careful risk management, rather than as a trivially accomplished undertaking that somehow carried no meaningful risk of failure. Let's also bring up something genuinely fascinating regarding how recent experimental archaeology and traditional knowledge revival projects have helped researchers develop a considerably more precise and considerably more respectful understanding of just how sophisticated ancient navigation systems actually were than earlier generations of researchers typically assumed. Voyaging recreations using traditional vessel designs and attempting to apply traditional navigation methods without modern instruments have consistently confirmed that skilled traditional navigators could actually achieve what historical accounts attributed to them, while also revealing that the practical difficulty of doing so was considerably greater than casual outside observers typically assumed when first encountering descriptions of these navigation systems. These experimental projects have also been genuinely important for reasons extending beyond purely academic research. They have supported efforts within Pacific Island communities specifically to revive and preserve traditional navigation knowledge that came very close to being completely lost during the disruption of traditional knowledge transmission systems that accompanied the colonial period and the introduction of modern navigation technology that made traditional methods seem practically unnecessary rather than culturally invaluable. Let's also bring up something genuinely interesting regarding how modern scientific research into human perceptual and cognitive capabilities has actually provided new frameworks for understanding how ancient navigation knowledge was encoded, stored, and applied. Specifically because this connects directly to the methodology we have discussed regarding ancient knowledge preservation more broadly throughout this series. Research into expert perceptual learning, the documented ability of individuals with extensive domain-specific experience to detect and interpret subtle environmental signals that complete novices literally cannot perceive at all, even when looking at the same information, provides a scientifically grounded framework for understanding how experienced ancient navigators could extract reliable navigational information from environmental signals that modern researchers with limited traditional navigation training initially struggled to detect or interpret correctly at all. The navigational signals were always present in the environment. The ability to reliably perceive and correctly interpret them required years of dedicated perceptual training and accumulated experience that fundamentally changed the navigator's perceptual system in ways that made genuinely different information available from the same environmental input that an untrained observer experienced as featureless and uninformative. Finally, it is worth touching on something genuinely worth appreciating regarding just how much accumulated observational knowledge had to be successfully built, refined, and transmitted, generation after generation, for ancient navigation to achieve the outcomes the historical and archaeological record confirms. It's sometimes achieved at truly remarkable scales. None of this happened because of one single brilliant observational insight made once and immediately applied everywhere. It happened through countless individual instances of patient empirical observation. Which star rises exactly where on the horizon at this particular latitude? How does the ocean swell feel different when a specific island is within a certain distance? How the birds begin flying in a specific direction at a specific time of day when land is near? Being carefully observed, tested against navigational outcomes, refined through accumulated experience, and then successfully transmitted to the next generation, who refined it further still. This represents one of the most genuinely impressive, if frequently underappreciated, aspects of ancient human intellectual achievement. An entire body of practical, hard-won navigational and perceptual knowledge built collectively and incrementally across an enormous span of human history, entirely without the benefit of writing, formal scientific institutions, navigation instruments, or any of the modern knowledge preservation and verification systems we currently take completely for granted. So, how did ancient humans actually navigate without any instruments whatsoever? Based on everything we have covered throughout this entire video, the honest, complete answer comes down to a genuinely impressive combination of factors working together across an enormous span of time. A comprehensive, practical astronomical knowledge base built through generations of patient nightly observation and carefully maintained oral transmission, allowing reliable directional orientation from star positions alone. A deeply developed physical sensitivity to ocean swell patterns, desert wind signatures, and other environmental directional signals built through years of dedicated perceptual conditioning and practical experience. A rich, detailed knowledge of land detection signals allows experienced navigators to locate specific destinations from distances far exceeding direct visual range. Carefully structured oral knowledge transmission systems, specifically engineered to preserve complex navigational knowledge accurately across many generations without any written recording medium. Cooperative social organization, distributing navigational monitoring responsibilities across multiple crew members in ways that exceeded what any single individual could have maintained alone. And honestly, maybe the most genuinely impressive thing to take away from this entire topic is recognizing just how much of our species' remarkable geographic distribution across nearly every accessible environment on Earth traces back to nothing more sophisticated than patient, accumulated human observational capability, generation after generation, refining perceptual sensitivity, practical knowledge, and transmission systems, slowly, steadily, expanding the boundaries of where humans could successfully navigate and therefore ultimately where humans could actually go. We didn't learn to navigate across oceans and deserts and trackless forests because of any single brilliant invention or any single heroic individual achievement. We did it the same way humans have accomplished nearly everything else we have covered throughout this entire series. Through patient accumulated knowledge, careful empirical observation, and the simple persistent willingness to keep paying close enough attention to the world around us to eventually understand what it was actually telling us.